My name is Vivian Xu, and I am an artist and researcher and educator. Yeah.
And what field do you work in?
My background is in my master's background is in interaction design, and it's a program called Design and Technology at Parsons, the New School for Design in New York, and specifically I focus on creating hybrid machines. Artworks that are in the form of machines that are a combination of electronics and biomedium.
Cool. Could you explain what bioart is?
So bioart is this sort of new art form that has been developing in the past 20 years that combines art with biology, and the main sort of breakthrough is that because biotechnology is becoming more and more advanced and also cheaper and more accessible and more I think more widespread and ubiquitous, that it's become not only a topic in art discussion and discourse, but also it's biomaterials. Living organisms have also sort of found their way into the art medium, and it's not actually new that artists use living things to create art, but it is new when they are going into molecular labs and tissue engineering labs and using the new technology.
Cool. So why have you taken such an interest in bioart?
My main interest is because I think ever since I was little, I've always liked two things. One is animals and one is art. And I think in the past I've always thought I'd just go be a wildlife photographer. That was like the best of both worlds. But I think I was lucky when I was at Parsons, being in New York and discovering labs like GenSpace and that kind of stuff. Being able to learn more about these new tools and technologies, and discovering this whole new world. I think it was pretty fortunate for me because it just combines my two favorite things.
So when someone says bioart, are they typically referring to the macro living organisms or more towards microscopic organisms?
I think there's a lot of definitions actually of bioart that I think is still being I think the concept itself is still being discussed because I've also written some articles about these things and interviewed sort of pioneering artists, and a lot of them says it's because of this new explosion in biotechnology. But at the same time, if you look at the wide spectrum of bioartists and their work, not everything is molecular, not everything is done in the lab. There are artists who work with it sort of merges a little bit with speculative design, thinking about the future of life, and that kind of stuff. And me personally, currently, I'm working more with insects, so I think it's very hard to say. But I think the sort of undertone of everything is that it's these issues of life and of our society after biotechnology that sort of drives these artworks and discussions. So.
Would you make a distinction between bio-inspired art and bioart itself?
I would make a distinction between bio-inspired art and bioart, because I think there is something very different about the art that uses living organisms nowadays than say in the 19th century, when there are a lot of illustrators. Because actually I have books here. Ernst Haeckel, who was a biologist, but also a very talented illustrator, and so he created these massive catalogs that documents the anatomy of microbials, but also they're sort of catalogs of art because they're done so well. So I think there's a very big difference, but also that line is still in flux, because I think the issue right now is I think a lot of artists don't truly know how to do lab work. So then it becomes a lot of discussion about biotechnology, about its influence on society, and using still more traditional means to create that discussion. But there are also artists, a few examples like Nuri Barshai in New York, Oren Katz from Australia, Anna Dimitriou from the UK. They themselves have gained experience throughout the years working. So they work directly in the lab, and that's how they create. And that's a very different creative process than someone who, say, creates a speculative world around biology.
Cool. So would you say most bioartists now are artist backgrounds delving into science, or scientists now delving into art?
I think there are both. For instance, I know an artist. Actually, he was a scientist. It's called Angelo Vermeulen. He's from Belgium, and so he is a scientist, I think, first. But he has started creating. He has this project called Biomod that he creates in different cities. It works with plants and robotics, and it's something that has been taken up by NASA to for the space project, and he had he did some research at NASA for a while, but also it's been exhibited in art museums and all that kind of stuff. I think there are another person would be Simon Park, who is a biologist in the UK, I think, and during his free time he creates what you can, I think, perceive as conceptual art or installation sometimes.
And then what we did there also is, well, here's a philosophical question, I guess, the divide between the scientist and the artist. And what do you see as, I don't know, what's if there is one difference, then I suppose between scientists and artists?
Well, it's interesting because if you think about, so I've seen this diagram when I was an undergrad, and it's basically this plane that is divided into 4 sections. So on one side, on say the left side, you have scientist and artist, and then on the right side you have designer and engineer. And so I would say scientists and artists maybe are more similar, and then designers and engineers are more similar in the sense that designers and engineers, they're more practical. Everything is grounded on practicality and if it can be produced in actuality or not. Whereas I think scientists and artists, they share something in common, which is this quest, quest for understanding a higher existence. So whether it's researching life sciences, just on I think the sort of fundamental biology level, where you're not really thinking, oh well, this discovery can cure cancer, but you're just asking, well, what is life, and what does this manifestation of life mean, etc. And I think artists do a lot of the same types of things, which is ask these sort of grander questions that are very idealistic and may not ever have an answer.
Back to bioart. So what do you see most promising now that's happening in bioart, and what do you think in the future?
My current opinion is that I think there needs to be more artists who actually learn the lab work, because I think that it's not quite as, personally, just to me, it's not quite as interesting doing pure speculative work. I think definitely there should be a trend, and there probably will be a trend of artists more and more artists actually learning the biology lab work, and knowing what they're working with. Because I think that if say you are a painter and you say you don't understand how to mix your own oils, and you have to find someone else to collaborate just to mix the oils and to apply it onto the canvas, then you don't really understand the sort of nuances in the medium that will allow you to create something great. So I think for someone to say I am a bioartist and I will produce interesting work, you really need to study the medium that you're working with.
Let's talk ethics. So what question, when you say about life in the society after biotechnology, what do you think are the driving questions then of bioart?
Well, I think a big central question is this question of what humanity is then, because it then becomes threatened, and there is this sort of, with that there is this sort of idea that, oh, we are gods, but there is also this idea with the relationship with technology that we will be overtaken by our own creations. So it's sort of this Frankenstein dilemma. I think my personal stance on it is that a lot of these, I think this discussion is very important, but I think that a lot of these discussions, often the outcomes influence policies on the development of science and technology, and that is something that is very, a lot of people have very different ideas, but I think my opinion is that science and technology itself is neutral. Knowledge and tools are neutral, it's just how we use them, and the thing is, once something comes out, we can't control, it's like Pandora's box, you cannot control how people will use it. And I think it's too idealistic to say everyone will be moralistic and ethical in their use of the tool. There are a lot of debates about the morality of how we treat living things and all that kind of stuff, but I think that a lot of the sort of concern evolves around our own concern of self-preservation. And so it comes from, I think, a very selfish standpoint rather than a more objective standpoint of looking at the larger picture of the biosphere. And so I feel like that actually needs to be, the sort of point of view needs to be adjusted. It's not about, we're never going to kill, and it's not about killing massive amounts of, living organisms or people. I think it's more about, it's more about really just being in tune with most of, in tune with the larger picture. Because I think a lot of these discussions, they tend to end up being very naive or black and white, or simplifies the actual complexity of the situation. Yeah. So I don't agree with that kind of promotion and discussion, because I think that is for the worse. I think there should be discussion on ethics, but I think it should be the right kind of discussion that doesn't oversimplify.
So when you say we can't stop, I suppose, Pandora's box after it's open, in the sense that once we have the tools and knowledge, we don't know how people are going to use it, do you think we can stop that progression as well? I feel if genetic engineering is on the track as it is now, have we already opened Pandora's box, I suppose? Or do you suppose these discussions can still influence how genetic engineering is developed in terms of whether we can stop it from moving forward or direct it in the
I think it's very hard to say, because I think scientists, like people, are all very different. There are all sorts of scientists. So for instance, one of the examples is a group of scientists recently, I think it was maybe a year or two ago, they developed this method of bringing back extinct animals. And I think they were successful in this sort of deer-type creature that had been extinct for a while, and they brought it back. And so some other scientists were applying this theory and method to potentially bringing back dinosaurs. And so there were a lot of discussion about that. One group, the scientists that were sort of promoting this idea, were very gung-ho about it. They were like, well, everybody deserves to live again, etc., ethics, but also there are other people who say, well, these are sort of, you have to look at the larger picture of evolution. They were extinct, you know. And the thing is, I think that if bringing something back or not really is not, there is no wrong or right to questions like these. But bringing something back like that, what happens is you can't predict how evolution and how environmental systems, ecosystems work, and so you may potentially wipe yourself out. And I think that is a lot of the sort of, well, is this ethical or not, is actually the question of, will this wipe humans out or not? You know, it's not quite, I mean, to be completely honest, I don't think if humans were wiped out, it would affect anyone else. Nobody, it's, you know, so it's actually a very neutral thing. Like, it's just something happening. It's like the weather. The storm forms and then it disappears, and it's a phenomenon. But so I think it's very hard to explain. Like, well, it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys seen the movie The Butterfly Effect, or if you guys read, actually it originally the idea came from Ray Bradbury's sci-fi short story called The Butterfly Effect, or maybe it wasn't called something, I forget what it was called, but it was talking about that. And so the story talks about how so you know how rich people go on safari hunts sometimes, and so into the future we've developed a technology with time travel that allows us to go back into prehistoric time, dinosaur time, to go safari hunting for dinosaurs. But then you don't want to, like, so the sort of track that they choose is carefully selected by the designers of the system, so that you don't accidentally step on something you're not supposed to and then change the entire future. And so that, you know, it's very hard to, like, you know, it's very hard to say how we like, it's the study of evolution, nobody's actually for sure certain about what really happened and what really caused this to happen and that to happen and this to form. And so it's very hard to say, well, like, are our discussions going to really affect and save us or destroy us with technology and science?
And I think what you're saying is also the bio-error would be the term, right? We don't know exactly what we're working with when we work with living organisms.
Yeah.
And they're unpredictable and they're alive. So if you would have to say, what is your greater fear, bio-error or bio-terror?
I would say bio-terror because I watched this documentary. Actually, I couldn't even watch that documentary. It was something that my husband pointed out to me. So there's this island called, I think, Plum Island. I think it's maybe on the east coast of the US, and it is military territory. And what they do is they create, I think, genetically engineered things. And because there have been rumors, it's this sort of conspiracy theory, one of the conspiracy theory topics is that there have been things that have escaped from that lab and have floated onto the shore or something that look very high level, or like living organisms. So not your like mouse with an ear, or not your like bacteria, but more like some kind of weird, you know, mammal, or like larger mammal, or even like weird looking humans. You know, it's all rumors, and I don't know what it is or what are the arguments, because I couldn't bear to finish the documentary. But I think because, like, if you look at military warfare right now, there are just not even thinking about biology, but just thinking about technology, there are now missiles that, not just missiles, but bullets that can follow you like missiles, no matter what. And they adjust themselves every second to make sure they track you down. And so unless you're going to evolve very fast, like, you know, very quickly to be faster than the bullet, then it's, you know.
Many think that we will evolve very quickly, the reason being because the biological, technological interface is already blurring, in that sense that we're already merging in many aspects. so then that merge between biology, technology, human, and machine, do you find that inspiring or threatening for the future?
Ironically, that I find very inspiring, and I don't really see it as anything new per se, because I think that the definition of humans, or one of the definitions of being human, is we make tools, and we sort of evolve with our tools. And so machine is just another form of our tools. And so we've always been a cyborg, because we've always sort of, we've developed our brains to be so advanced and sort of are sort of helpless compared to all other animals in all other areas, because I think that we've evolved with the tools that we've made. Partially. I mean, not completely. I'm not saying this is definitive. So I think the cyborg is not something to fear, because it's what we've always been. It's just manifesting in a very different way right now. That doesn't match our old standards.
And so then, in terms of genetic engineering, the phrase I have, from superhero to Frankenstein, where would you put genetic engineering on that scale?
I think it's hard to say. I think it has multiple areas. I think probably both. Because if you're creating a bacteria that produces a certain material that it normally doesn't produce, that's sort of like a Frankenstein. It's creating something from scratch, right? But then if you're, if you're say creating a sort of how should we say it? If you're like genetically filtering your child, like and seeing if this child specifically has illnesses, and whether you should abort it or not, versus the next child is very healthy, etc., and that kind of stuff. I think it's trying to create better humans, or that kind of concept, which is like the sort of transhuman technology, and to a certain extent science is to enhance the human experience and enhance the human abilities. So the Frankenstein is, I think, like the post-human, where we sort of, because if you look at Western ideology, human is like the Renaissance brought about humanism, right? And so that became like everything is like centered around the human experience and perspective, because before it was crushed by like the Catholic Church, and so I think it became, and then that ever since then, like the human perspective has to a great extent influenced how we think about ourselves and the world and perceive things. The post-human is we start to think about things from perspective of other organisms. Or we try to think outside of ourselves, which is, really impossible, but at least we try, and it's a very different perspective. And then the transhuman is, we want to be Superman, we want to be better than ourselves, we want to, so I think it depending on what kind of research and what kind of motive behind the sort of goals, it could be either or. Yeah.
So art as a public engagement tool, I suppose, is a public engagement tool. What do you think specifically about bioart that allows us to ask these questions in a provoking way?
I think that, I think bioart can do that if it's done well. I think that at the same time, I feel that a lot of other things can also do it. For instance, scientists through their research, through their scientific projects, engineers, designers. I think that bioart in itself is sort of this. I feel it's something that happens within the art world, and but I think that it's not the only way. It's not like, scientists can't communicate and can bring up these issues with the public, and they have to sort of mediate through the artists with the public or designers. I don't think it's that way. I think that it's just one way of discussing these issues. There are many other ways that are just as valid, if not more. So.
Of the bio art examples I know, Oren Katz is his name, right? And he does tissue engineering, right? And he put an ear on a mouse. Is that?
I don't think he personally did that. What he did was he made these little outfits that were grown from tissue. So it's called victimless leather.
Yes, he grew leather with that from the bottled substrate, I believe, right? And kind of same with Eduardo Cash.
He made a glow-in-the-dark rabbit.
Right, and I think all these depend on a shock factor. So in terms of bioart, do you think it relies on a shock factor in order to have its impact?
Well, because I've talked with Oren about his ideas and stuff. I've not really talked with Eduardo Cap. I don't think Oren, because I think a lot of the thought that goes into his work is actually not, I think it turns out shocking, but a lot of the, if you really talk to him and you hear the thought behind it, it's actually very profound and complex, and there's a lot of issues that he draws up because the sort of, the idea behind the victimless leather is that he's creating something that is neither alive nor dead. And what is that? Because that is something that is new, that was not before created by nature. And so it's these new sort of alien terrains where biotech allows us to go, but we have never ventured before. And it of course it's shocking because nobody's, we've not had these things before. But yes, I definitely think that there is a shock factor in bioart, and I think that there is also this sort of trend in bioart. A lot of people sort of see it as the future and sort of do it, but I think that you have to think about, well, why am I doing this? Why am I specifically using this medium? Why am I, and so forth. And I don't think that there is a lot of want, but I think there's not necessarily enough understanding for everyone to pursue it to the best of its abilities.
And then in terms of levels of bio, how would you characterize good bio art or bad bio
I think
art?
it's hard to say with all art, because how do you say this piece of artwork is better than the next? It's very subjective. I have a friend who is he's a fairly well-known Chinese artist, and he said something which I find really interesting. He said, well, art is this thing that it's kind of like a secret society. There are people who are in that circle and people who aren't in that circle, and the people who are in that circle, they have this discourse and they understand what everyone's talking about, and they know, like, oh, who has deeper, like, has thought about this issue deeper and who hasn't, and therefore who's more profound and who isn't. Whereas the people who are looking in from the outside, they don't know. They don't have the language to be in that discourse. And so, I mean, I think that art that makes people think is good art. So there are artworks that not everyone likes. There are artworks that everyone sometimes vehemently hates. But as long as it, sometimes it needs that sort of a good piece of work when thrown to the public, and it can create something that is confrontational. Then people start discussing and questioning and arguing. I think that is meaningful and good.
So if we say good art is defined as one that invokes debate and questions and discussion among its audience or viewers, are there particular characteristics that you see within bioart that can cause, or that art that shares general trends or patterns in provoking discussion or debate?
I don't understand the question.
Or it's like, if good art is defined as like one that provokes debate, what characteristics of bio art can provoke that debate? General patterns or characteristics?
Well, I think the thing is a lot of the times, so for instance, I think either sometimes in New York or in Shanghai, I've talked to friends in Berlin, when you put a piece of work there that is, sort of under the large umbrella of bio art, and so it usually probably has some like either lab equipment or some living stuff happening in the artwork itself. The first thing that people sometimes start arguing about is this art? And so there's, like you said, there's a shock factor. And some people sort of throw that out there just because it generates that question, is this art? But it doesn't go deeper, into like the issues actually. And I think a lot of I think that the thing with bio art is because it is already so shocking because of the medium and the methodologies, that sometimes that can blanket whether nuancedly whether the artwork itself is good or not, or a lot of people sort of don't even look at the deeper or more deep profound questions because they're so shocked by the medium or so shocked by the presentation, or and I think that because of that I think it's hard to say, I think I'm still trying to figure out really what is good and what is bad, because there's so many different standards, there's so many different aspects to it. So yeah, I'm not sure is I guess my answer.